And this kind of forms kind of my worldview too, that one person paying attention can radically change somebody's life for the future. Because it wasn't her job necessarily to like
track me
down, do research on my papers and do research on this, little known thing at the time, dyslexia. And she radically altered the trajectory of my life. And I'm eternally grateful for her.
From Fiore Communications, it's How I Got Here, a show of inspiring stories from Tallahassee area leaders, business owners, and neighbors, all the challenges, opportunities, inspirations, the twists and turns of life that led them to where they are today. Everyone has a story worth telling, and I am really grateful that we get to bring a few of them to you. I truly have been changed by my conversations with these amazing people, and I'm confident you will be too. I'm Dave Fiore, and in this episode, I speak with Mark McNees, the social entrepreneur in residence in the Jim Moran College of Entrepreneurship at Florida State University. Off campus, Mark is best known as the founder of Element 3 Church and Red Eye Coffee, experiences that helped shape his focus today. The native of Southern California ran his father's successful heavy equipment rental company before he felt the call to give up his comfortable but unfulfilling life to pursue the mission of church planting across the country in Tallahassee. He discovered a love for serving people and the desire to have a global impact without being afraid to ruffle a few feathers along the way. Mark is a husband, father, speaker, and sought-after consultant who still follows his dad's motto that in every situation, there is a way. We began our conversation talking about growing up in a hardworking family that taught him the value of persistence and eventually purpose.
Growing up, I had a kind of an interesting childhood. My dad is an entrepreneur. He was kind of a forced entrepreneur. He worked in heavy equipment rental his whole life, and the company that he was a salesperson, and the company he was working for went out of business. And I think I was 8 or 7 years old when that happened.
Okay.
And when that happened, he came home and he called a family meeting. I remember, we're all sitting there, upstairs, and he's like, well, I need to find a new career, and what do you guys think, I should do? I have a brother.
Okay.
So it's my mom, my dad, and my brother and I. My brother's 4.5 years older than me. So
Okay.
I'm just a kid, and I'm like, I think you should be a fireman. Yeah.
Of course.
I thought it was an open discussion of what he was going to do for the rest of his life.
The coolest job you could think of.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and the funny thing is, my daughter's a firefighter here in Tallahassee now.
Oh, okay.
So I got one.
Yeah.
In the family.
Right.
And he's like, well, I think we're gonna, he says, I think they can't pay me, so they're gonna I'm gonna take some equipment and I'm gonna start my own business. Which I was like, oh, well, that's not as cool as being a fireman, but but okay. And so that was a really interesting time. When I was super young, my parents didn't have money, and even when they got married, they couldn't afford to pay the pastor. And my dad went fishing and gave him a few fish.
Oh, wow.
I remember going to what we would call the bash can store, where if a can was dented, they'd take the labels off and write tomato on it. I mean, probably legally you can't have stores like that anymore, but
Right.
So it was just kind of going there. My mom used to get us, she would go to the back of the supermarket and get produce that they were throwing out and expired milk and things like that.
Okay.
It was just very, very tight.
Right.
Then my dad, started doing really well, and we had a really, I would say, middle class upbringing. Not anything extravagant. I mean, definitely tight budget and everything, but comfortable.
Yeah.
And then he started his business, and startups. There's no money in startups.
No.
And I remember sitting there. I'd like to say doing my homework. I probably wasn't in my bedroom, but I was doing something. And I'd have 2 lights on, and he would walk in, and I didn't get it at the time, but he's like, do you really need to have 2 lights on? That's, and I'm like, what? And I'm like, well, I guess not.
Right.
And so things got really, really lean for several years. So lean that I think it encouraged my brother to join the military, the Army, on his 18th birthday. And I was 13 and a half when he left. And when he left, my dad, like, the business really started to take off. He landed a couple of really big jobs. And then suddenly we were like, the family had money again.
Now, when you look back, I mean, obviously your whole adult life has been dedicated to entrepreneurship in some way.
Right.
So do you look back on that and say you saw the benefits of sticking with it, and if there's any way to make it, or what it took to make it, and then the rewards at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I learned was there's no guarantees. My dad had a lot of entrepreneur friends, so I saw people lose everything, and I saw people do extremely well, and so I saw the whole gamut. One thing that I really learned was just the importance of tenacity. My dad had these ugly yellow cards with black font on it. It just said, "There is a way," and he would give it to everybody he saw. It was all over the house. Just this idea that there is a way. I may not know what it is right now, but there is a way to do this. And then my mom, who I think she was even though she'd never worked in the business or very little, if she did, she was a tour de force as well. Like she would lovingly tell my dad, like, don't come home unless you sell something. So he had that motivation. And one thing that I learned from my mom is the axiom, and I use it to this day, is persistence wears resistance. It doesn't, like, I'm not the most talented or smart or, clever, person, but I'm persistent. Right. And I'll keep going, and people will either like just give up and say fine, or I'll find a way. And that's with my education. I've just never been a great student, but I have my doctorate just because I'm persistent. I just keep on going and going and going. If I have a goal, I just keep working at it and until I achieve it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you why you think your dad made it, but I think you just answered it. That he just would never give up, it sounds like. He just
never. I think it was that perfect combination that you often hear, like the person behind the man, right? And my mom was super supportive, but also kind of had that edge of, you're going to do this. We've mortgaged everything that we have to do this.
Right. There's no turning back.
There's no turning back. This is either we're going to lose everything, which she fully signed on for. But my mom is, and I love this about her, we're not going to lose everything because we didn't do our part. Right. My mom has this thing, and she says, like, you can carry whatever you can carry. And I have my palms, both palms up right now. And then she says, you do everything you can carry, and then you turn it over. And she's a person of faith, and she would say, let God take care of the rest.
Right.
I've heard her say that so many times in so many different situations. You only can be responsible for what you're responsible for. There's lots of external factors.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, win, lose, or draw, you should be able to look your family and yourself in the mirror and say, I did everything that was in my power to make this work.
Yeah. Yep. And I read that you were a little entrepreneur yourself at age around 10.
Yeah.
You were renting video games to your friends.
Yeah. That was one of my first successful actual money-making businesses. So when I was 9, 10 years old, entrepreneurship to me is identifying people's problems that you can solve at a monetary plus, essentially. Will people pay you to solve their problems? And one of the big problems that I saw was these new video games like Atari and Intellivision were hitting, and we were all crazy about it. But the games back then were super simple, and you could basically master them in 45 minutes or something. Yeah. But they were super expensive. I don't know. Especially for the time, right? I think it was like $30, back in the 70s.
That's huge.
That's a huge amount of money. So parents especially parents that didn't get the video game thing, right? They didn't have video games, and so they were like, "Well, we bought you a game, and we bought you the console," so everybody kind of had these games, and they were bored with them. And I saw my friends starting like swapping games and everything, but there was always like a lot of friction in like, well, my game, and all this kind of stuff. So I went in and decided I'll start buying up these games, and then I'll just rent them for 25 cents per day. That really, really took off. It took off to the point where I stopped carrying books to school, and I had just video games packed in my backpack. And
so how did that impact your academic career?
my academic career has never been all that great.
And at that age, you're like,
yeah, and that's when I learned that asking for forgiveness is better than asking for permission. The school and that regulations can shut you down overnight. So the school didn't like that. It was a different time, right? Like at the Jim Moran College, we expect students to do this.
Yeah.
This is what we teach, but they didn't like it, and they shut me down. And then I pivoted, and my parents' home was very close to our school, and people would like walk by our house to go to the bus stop and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would run home and set up game consoles in the garage, open up the garage, and charge kids to come
play there.
Come play there.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my first, I guess, successful-ish business.
Yeah. And then after that, you went to La Cañada High School? Am I saying it right?
Yeah, La Cañada.
Because it looks like Canada.
Yeah, L.A., Canada. In fact, there's La Cañada Street, and there used to be a joke that, on the radio. There was this commercial where these kind of like Dumb and Dumber guys are on the L.A. Canada freeway, but they're never getting to Canada, right? Yeah, it's La Cañada.
Okay.
So probably there's a big jump from where I went. So I actually flunked out of school in the 9th grade.
Okay.
And on my way out, the guidance counselor tracked me down.
When you say flunked out, I mean they told you not to come back?
Yeah, I had a 0.00 average.
Okay, that's not very high.
No, it's not very high. It's hard to do, too.
Yeah, I was going to say that takes some effort.
It was a point where I had totally given up, and I just wasn't succeeding in school, and it was just it was really, really challenging. I was on my way out after I got dismissed, and this guidance counselor, her name she's passed away now, Mrs. Bryson.
Mm-hmm.
And she tracked me down and she said, "Hey, Mark, can you come to my office? I just want to ask you some questions." And I'm like, I didn't really know her or anything, but she obviously heard my story.
Right.
And she pulled out a lot of like my assignments. Like she went to the teachers and got my assignments. And she's like, "I've been looking at your assignments." And she's like, "I don't think you're dumb." And she's like, "Do you mind if I give you a test?" And I'm like, "Oh, great, another test to flunk, right?" She's like, "This is not a pass-fail kind of thing. This is just—" So she did this thing, and she didn't diagnose me, but she's like, "I think you have something called dyslexia." And I didn't know what that was. Nobody really in the early 80s knew what dyslexia was. It's not like today that we know these things. And so she took the time to call my parents in and just say, we don't, my dad dropped out of high school. My mom didn't graduate high school. My brother barely graduated high school. So this is kind of like part of my family, heritage. I was planning on just going to work and hammering it out, get a trade and do something. So she explained to my parents like this dyslexia thing. Then I went and got some more testing and things like that. And I was in the 9th grade, and they found out that I had a reading level of like lower, mid, 4th grade, like numbers and especially numbers and like letters. Like I just switched them around all the time.
Wow,
and it came to a point like they found out that I'd compensated all those years because I listen really well. And I was able to make it by, but getting up into, high school where you're writing a lot and everything, you just couldn't get away with it anymore. And I got so discouraged that I just kind of threw up my hands.
But it takes a lot of brain power, I imagine, to convert everything in your head and try to, make it.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is I have a couple of blog posts that terrible students make great entrepreneurs. Richard Branson and all these guys have severe dyslexia. And I think it forces you to look at things differently and solve problems in a different way, which is exactly what entrepreneurship is.
Right.
So to my parents' credit, and fortunately, this is a time where there was money. My dad's business was doing really well. I went to a small little school called Hillside. It was in La Cañada to teach me basically tools to overcome dyslexia. So I started full-time at Hillside. I think in my sophomore year, I got to take one class at La Cañada High. And then in junior year, I think I was like just majority there. And then my senior year, I was full-time except taking like one course at Hillside. So I did actually graduate from La Cañada High. It was a really great experience for me, and it was just super important. And this kind of forms kind of my worldview too, that one person paying attention can radically change somebody's life for the future. Because it wasn't her job necessarily to like
track you down,
track me down, do research on my papers and do research on this, little known thing at the time, dyslexia. And she radically altered the trajectory of my life. And I'm eternally grateful for her.
Right. So after high school, it looks like you went to school for fashion design and merchandising.
Yeah. Nobody ever would guess that about me. I wanted to be in the fashion industry. I wanted to.
You were into clothes and stuff?
I really liked the business, and I liked fashion, and I was into really two things. I was really into politics in high school, and I was really into fashion. So I wanted to be a buyer. I wanted to rise in the ranks of fashion. So I went to FITM, Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, and got my AA in fashion marketing. Through that, I realized I didn't want to be part of the fashion industry. And graduated from that, and I didn't really ever think I would go on in school, but I really fell in love with marketing at that point. I think being a marketing major too was very helpful for me because every time they said marketing, it would get my attention because my name's Mark, and I'm like,
marketing. You thought you were missing something.
Yeah, I thought I was being called on multiple times throughout the day. So I think seriously, I kept my attention.
Right.
You hear your name, and
so for all you budding college students out there, pick a major with your name in it.
That's right.
It'll help you stay focused.
Yeah, especially if you have ADHD or something. Yeah, it's definitely helpful. So I went to a small school in Burbank called Woodbury University. And it was a university because it had two colleges. They had the College of Business and they had the College of Architecture. So I got my Bachelor's of Science in Marketing there, and just absolutely fell in love with marketing and just everything about it, because marketing, I think, really lines up with kind of like what I like to do is tell stories and connect people in that story and have them belong to that story. Now, I know I'm not telling you anything, but
no, that's great.
But so I always really liked marketing, and I would say that that's probably like at the core in business, that's probably like where my main skill set is being able to articulate and tell stories of my company or other companies and help connect people, the target market with those people.
All right. So during this time, were you also working at your father's company?
Right. So when I graduated, my dad always really had the dream of having my brother and me working at the company. Right. He even named the company Russmar, which my brother's name's Russ, my name's Mark, so Russmar.
Okay.
I always said we'd be a lot more successful if it was Mar Russ, but nobody listens to me. I'm the marketing guy, but okay. My brother was still in the military, so I went to work with my dad, and I took over the marketing of the company, and I did outside sales as well. I was able to really bring a lot of the things that I learned in marketing and just kind of like how I naturally think about storytelling and really change the way that we marketed the company and how we branded it and to tell the story. And that was really, really successful.
All right. So what was your life like there, living there, working in your dad's business? Just kind of, how would you describe what that period of your life was like?
Yeah, it was an interesting period. I was living in Redondo Beach at that time, and I was really close to the company. The company really took off. I was pretty good at what I was doing, and my dad had built just an amazing foundation for me to, do the next thing with, I think, some of the marketing tools that I brought were really big, especially in that industry. It was all kind of like at that day, kind of mom and pop, and just it wasn't very sophisticated.
Right.
The marketing, and then people are going to laugh at this, but while I was there, like the fax machine came out.
That was a big deal.
It was a big deal,
Yeah.
and I remember buying a fax number list for contractors, and I started this, fax campaign, and the business just blew up. Like I was able to contact thousands of people in a day,
Right.
instead of me going door to door to door to door.
Right, like blast faxes.
Yeah, blast
Right.
faxes. I'm original spammer, so thank me every time you get spam.
Yeah.
And back in the day, it was so new. Fax machines, like I don't know if you remember. You're probably too young, but you would hear the fax machine go off,
no,
and
the
you'd run
dial-up
over and
sound,
like,
yeah.
what's coming in?
How do they do that? It's just so cool.
Yeah. So that was a huge boom for us, and so things were going really well. The money was really good, and I was living at the beach, and at that point, I went into my first like real depression. I always kind of had this worldview of if I married the right person, I was living in the right place, I was driving the car that I want, I was making this amount of money, I would be happy. And very young, I achieved like all of these goals, and I kind of like was like, well, now what? Not that I was like wealthy or anything, but I was really comfortable, especially for my age. I'd done well, and so I hit this huge depression. I'd been married 6 months, so like everything on the outside looked like it was, rock and roll and sex and caviar and all this kind of stuff. But I came to a point where I was like, wow, like this doesn't. None of this matters. I like have no joy in life. Like I don't have any excitement or anything like that. My dad was out of the business at that time. He had retired.
So what was the result of the depression you were experiencing?
Well, my dad and I didn't have the greatest relationship at that time. I could just say I was cocky and not very likable, kind of a know-it-all. I think I'd grown a really thick skin just because of the dyslexia and everything, and just kind of like I'll show you kind of attitude, and I don't need anybody. I can do it on my own and everything. What a lot of 20-something males are like. My son is like right now. He's figuring it out. In fact, when I have issues with my son, I'll call up my dad, and he'll start laughing, and I'm like, that's not helpful.
But he's enjoying it.
Yes. He cares, and obviously he gives me good advice, but
Sure.
He's definitely enjoying that I'm getting a little taste of who I was. So at that time, I would say I was a functioning atheist. I didn't really think about spirituality. I never really thought about my soul or anything. And both my parents have been people of faith their whole life. And I hadn't seen my dad maybe for like 6 months, and he's a musician. He was traveling around playing shows and everything, and he's played, with John Denver, Jerry Garcia, Vince Gill, like backed him up on one of his albums. He's in the Bluegrass Hall of Fame.
Wow, what does he play?
He plays the dobro or resophonic guitar, so he's very well known. And they just did, I think, like I forget how many hundreds or thousands of dobro players like had a thing in North Carolina where he was the person of honor, and they were playing his songs.
Wow. And what's his name?
His stage name is Leroy Mack.
Okay.
LeroyMack.com. So he was heading out to like Czechoslovakia or something. There was like a big boom of interest in bluegrass music. So he decided to stop by the office, and it was probably the lowest point of my life when he came by. He's like, "Hey, how's it going?" and everything. And I don't know why, but it was like the first time I like was going to be honest about how I was feeling. And I asked him into my office, which used to be his office, but it's my office now. And we sat down, and I just kind of like poured out my heart. I just said, "Hey, Dad, I'm miserable. Like I I don't know what to do. Like, I don't want to do anything anymore. I just kind of want to drop out. I always remember he got this smile. And I know this is a family show, so I'll edit this. I was like, this. I just told my dad like I want to give up, and he's like smiling, and I was like so angry. And then he looked at me. He's like, "Your mother and I have been praying for this day to come."
Wow.
And so he said, "My mother, your mother and I have been praying for this day." And I'm like, "Why would you pray for me to come to my end?" And he's like, "Because we've watched you live your life on your own, and we've wanted to see you come back and like rely on family and rely on God." And I said, "Dad, I don't need this religion stuff. Like, I've rejected that." And he's like, "I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about having a relationship with, one true living God." And I'm like, "Wow." So we talked about that. And at that point, I became a follower of Christ. And like, people are like, "Were you so joyful and everything?" I'm like, "No, I was still miserable and everything." But I did have one thing that I hadn't had in years and years and years. And that was a little bit of hope that there was more to life than making money and being
Right.
successful in business.
Yep.
So that became a big part of my life. My dad was really good friends with one of the most successful home builders in Los Angeles and Colorado Springs. So I had an enormous amount of respect for him as a businessman, and I realized that he also was entrusted with depression. And when I talk about depression, I think of it as you're entrusted with affliction to help other people. You don't suffer from it if you have the right attitude and look at it correctly. You're entrusted with it. And I've been entrusted with dyslexia. I've been able to speak to so many students who have learning disabilities and so many teachers to encourage them how important they are. And then, entrusted with depression and been able to have, lots of conversations with people about that. It's like, in fact, it led me to write a book a lot of years later. I swam from Alcatraz Island to San Francisco,
I saw that,
and I wrote a book called Immersion, and just the importance of taking care of your mind, soul, body, and your spirit and your community based on the Great Commandment, Great Commission. And so that became a big part of my life, is like discovering what the soul was and what it means to live for something that's not necessarily for you. And so
Which was a pretty foreign concept to you at that point in your life.
Yeah.
Right?
My mom likes to recount a story that we used to go to the ballet. We had season tickets to the Joffrey Ballet and the American Ballet, and that was just a thing. And my mom and I always loved musicals and things like that. So that was just something that we did. And I remember asking, she brings this up all the time, or used to bring it up all the time. And she asked me one day, like, what do I want out of life? At that point, I said, I want to make so much money that I can tell anybody to go to HE double hockey sticks. That was just my, this is what I thought. And, I'm not proud of that, but that's just truth. I mean, that's just where I was.
Not dependent on anybody but yourself.
Yeah. And it's so funny. Like, I mean, I think about that young man, and it's really difficult like, even when I talk about it, it's hard for me to connect how I feel now to that. Like, it's so foreign to me, but I know I experienced it. I know it's true. But I mean, we're talking a lot of decades in between.
Yeah.
And I've taken a very different path than just trying to make money. In 2002, I think I'd landed a big business deal, and I just felt nothing. Like, it like wasn't important to me. It wasn't going to change my life at all. And I was like doing a lot of volunteering in the church at the time and with kids. And those interactions were so important to me and fruitful. I was like, I think that this is what I should be doing, is just working and serving people. So I called up my mom and dad because I was their retirement program. And I said, hey, it was good at the time. The rental business was becoming big business, and there was United Rentals and Sunbelt Rentals and all coming on, and they were gobbling up little businesses like ours. And I said, what do you think if we could sell the business? I think it's a good time to sell the business. I don't think I want to do this for the rest of my life. I think I want to be a church planter, actually. They were like so excited and so supportive.
Mhm.
And so my dad came back into the business to help, market it and sell it. And we eventually sold it. And my parents did, very well. I did pretty good. It was good. It was good for everybody. And then at that point, I was like, okay, where do you want us to go?
Hey everybody, just a quick reminder that this episode is brought to you by Fiore Communications. Just like people, every business has a story to tell, and we've been helping our clients tell their story since 2001, because who you are as a company is just as important as what you do. To learn more about how telling your story can make a difference in your business, visit fiorecommunications.com. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. At this point, it's you and your wife?
Yeah,
Okay.
And I have 2 kids. I have Madison, who's the firefighter. She's probably 6, and my son is 2 at this time. So I travel all around looking at different places, and then some folks wanted to plant a church here in Tallahassee. They called me out of the blue.
I mean, you knew them?
No, I didn't know them. We were both part of something called the Willow Creek Association.
Yeah.
So I was part of that, and I had some I'm a church planter, if anybody.
Bill Hybels.
Yeah, Bill Hybels.
Yeah.
They said, hey, we'd like you to come out. And I said, I'm a Gen Xer from LA, right? And they're like, we know who you are and everything. I'm like, okay. So I told my wife and I promised God we'd go through every open door. And so I wasn't going to come. And I told my wife, and she hates flying. I said, hey, these people in Tallahassee wanted me to come out. I don't think I'm going to go. And she's like, we promised God we'd go through every open door. I'm like, that's right. We promised. You're coming with me. So we came here, and it was nothing. I never thought I would be called to a city of less than at least 500,000 people.
Right.
I was from LA. LA mindset is very, very different. And so we came out here, and it was right when the whole hanging Chad thing had just been resolved and everything. And then I saw the universities and I was like, wow, Tallahassee changed the trajectory of the history of the earth. Like what happened here, radically what was decided here in Tallahassee.
The Supreme Court. Here in Tallahassee.
Arguably, we would be in a very different place today, worse, better, I don't know. But we would have a very different history.
If Al Gore would have been president instead of George Bush.
Exactly. Right. I came back and forth, several times talking to people and things like that. And I just really felt, wow, you know what? I always wanted to have a global impact. And I'm like, I think this is a place where you could have a global impact with, the 2 major universities, with the big community college, the government. People come here and then they go out all over the world. And I'm like, if you want to have a global impact, I think this is the place to do it, which you would never maybe on a map pick Tallahassee. But if you look at the fundamentals, there's a lot of people who are very influential who live here. Yeah. They call them, they're like, we want you to be our church planter. And I said, tell you what, I'm going to fly. I was still working full time at Russmar and everything. And I said, I'm going to fly out on a red eye or something on Friday. On Saturday, we're going to have a meeting and I'm going to do all the talking and you're going to listen. And then on Sunday, we'll have lunch or something before I get back on a plane, and we're going to have a meeting and you're going to do all the talking. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see if God's bringing us together. So I flew out, and in that meeting, I laid out worst case, church people fears, Mm-hmm. The church that I was running called B2X in LA. It was a church within a church, a big church, and there was a big kind of Gen X, millennial ministry. And we really had people coming who really weren't normal church people. And we had the church hired security and all this kind of stuff because they were afraid stuff would happen. And the security guard is hey, there's guys smoking pot in the parking lot. What do you want me to do? And I said, go back and tell them church starts in 5 minutes. Finish up.
Right. Yeah.
So it was that kind of thing. So
kind of trying to reach the unchurched, not
Right.
the
I
typical
wasn't
churchgoer.
I wasn't trying to reshuffle the sheep pen or anything
Right.
like that. I wasn't interested in that
Right.
at all. I had a really clear vision of what I was being called to do. So, I'm like, there's going to be people with tattoos and nose piercings, and they're going to be smoking
Saying bad
pot
words.
and all this kind of stuff. And so I did. I went back to my hotel room that night, and I'm like, I scared these people off. They're not going to want to do this. So the next day,
Because you kind of cast that vision for
I
that's
cast
what
this
you wanted
vision.
here.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, I'm not interested in reshuffling the sheep pen. I'm not interested in trying to get, John and Susie from Killarn United Methodist to come to our church. Like,
Right.
it's just not that. I'm not giving my life to that. My life is wanting to people who've lost hope or need hope and need love and feel like, I don't believe this is true, but a lot of people feel like wouldn't be welcome in another church.
Right.
A traditional church. I don't believe that's true. I believe that people could walk into any church, but you hear like, oh, if I walked into church, lightning would strike me. And I go, no, people would hug you and love you. But I wanted to create something that people like that didn't have, like they felt like they belonged.
Yeah.
That, I always was very authentic and just about my brokenness on stage and everything. Just like, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. We're all struggling through this. We may be struggling with different things. So I just wanted that kind of a culture.
Right.
So on Sunday, we got together and we just sat there, and I was with, probably like maybe 8 other people. Average age, probably 60-something, not really my demographic.
Right.
So I'm sitting there, and then the leader of the group, I'm like, this is the meeting that you're doing all the talking. And he looked at me and he said, what are we waiting for?
Wow.
I'm like, oh, okay. So
I guess they bought into your vision.
Yeah,
for
totally.
What you wanted to do.
100%. All of those people were amazingly faithful through some really hard times. You'll probably appreciate this. Like when we were, in the what we called the cocoon stage, where we weren't public and we are just kind of like who our identity was, and we came up with all of these like different names for the church and things like that. We're like, let's pick a name. I'm like, we're not going to pick a name. People at the downtown Get Down are going to pick the name. And so
crowdsourcing it.
I made up a marketing survey. One of the founding members of the church is an owner-operator of a Chick-fil-A, so he gave us a stack of Chick-fil-A coupons.
Nice. People will do anything for Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, and I didn't, in California at the time, I'd never even heard of Chick-fil-A.
Right.
So, like, I was like, I didn't realize that at the time. So they're like, you're going to let drunk people pick the name of our church? And I'm like, 100%. Yeah. So I sent, these nice people, out with clipboards and Chick-fil-A coupons. And we ended up calling the church Element 3 Church, E3 for short.
Right.
And the 3 elements was where faith, authenticity, and emerging culture meet. So we started that, and we ended up renting the Tree restaurant from DeVoe Moore. The first Sunday that we were meant to start, I came there, and somebody had thrown a rock through our window, not wanting us to be there. And I mean, there's a lot of ugliness because a lot of church people, the church culture was very different in 2003 versus it is now. We were the first kind of like church that was kind of like, kind of the Mars Hill,
right.
Warehouse 242, all these kind of like, kind of like different.
Not typical.
I had pastors, which we reconciled later, but were like in the pulpit calling us a cult and everything. I'm like, look at our statement of beliefs. Like, what's cultish about it? They're exactly the same as yours.
Right.
So that was really hard for me to come from LA, which is probably not at that, not so much judgmental, and, have pastors actively like denouncing what we were trying to do without ever speaking to me and things like that. I was very lonely the first year I was here because I didn't have any church community. I didn't have other pastors. They were just angry. To their credit, I think every single one of us, just about every single one of them after, years and years and years of me being there, invited me out to lunch and asked for my forgiveness. They were just like, we were just threatened. We didn't take the time to actually get to know you or what you were doing and things like that.
That's interesting to me. I mean, they were threatened by potentially, I mean, you're not going after the same people in theory, right? So
No.
they thought you were hurting the gospel message in some way?
I think so. That would probably be the purest spin on it that you could give, and I really don't know. I think it was just so different for Tallahassee at that period. Going to E3, especially in the early days, was like going to a rock show. Like, we had an amazing band and lights and fog machines,
Right.
and instead of pews, we had cocktail tables that people were sitting at and things like this. So it was a very, very different kind of vibe than what people had experienced before. I got a lot of criticism for this, but I didn't drink even at the time, but I would go to bars and hang out. I had a motorcycle at the time. I would go to like Hooters on Harley night and stuff like that. There's enormous amount of criticism from what I would call the traditional church because I was there, but I always thought, you know what, when I go to heaven, I'm going to smell like smoke. I don't smoke, but
Right, yeah.
but
Jesus kind of set a precedent for that,
and that's
right?
the way I looked at it. It was like Jesus came for the least of these. He hung out with prostitutes and fishermen and normal people. He wasn't hanging. Well, he did go to the temple, but he wasn't like. I mean, when Jesus had harsh words, it was for the religious people, right? Who thought they were clean on the inside, but they're rotting on the inside. So, to me, I do and have a very supportive wife. I just had a very firm, what I would call a call that I wasn't being called at that time to country clubs. I was being called to clubs.
Right.
And
So were people coming to faith in the church?
Oh yeah, we just had a flood of people who just felt welcome and were able to hear the gospel in their own language, not English, but
Right.
in a way that made sense to them and wasn't condemning, but a message of hope. We never at E3 said, you have to do this, you have to do that, to be accepted, right? That all you have to do is admit that, how we would say it is, this is a broken, messy person who needs help.
Right.
And that was the only deal. It worked for, I was the pastor there for, I think, 17 years.
All right. So part of your vision for E3 is social impact, right? Beyond just the doors of the church.
Yeah.
And that led to Red Eye Coffee at some point. So tell us how that happened.
So my father and mother always modeled generosity and giving. It used to make me angry when I was a kid, but they gave a large part of their resources to local and global empowerment charities or gospel initiatives. And so that was modeled for me. And when I became a follower of Christ, that was extremely important to me, as well as investing in really interesting things and people who wanted to be what I would call the tangible hand of Christ. So when I moved to Tallahassee, I took like a 95% pay cut and realized very quickly, like all startups, there's no money in church planting. And for the first time really in my adult life, there was no money to do this. And through Providence, I ran across a guy who was a coffee roaster here in Tallahassee, but he didn't know how to sell coffee. Well, I don't know how to roast coffee, but I know how to sell things.
Yeah.
So he's like, you want to buy some? And I had $20 in my pocket. And I said, I'd like to buy $20 worth of coffee. So I bought that $20 worth of coffee, and I put that coffee into smaller bags. I just wrote on the bag, 100% of proceeds go to local and global empowerment charities. And I think I had like 6-7 bags. And I went to church and I said, hey, I bought this coffee. We don't have any money to invest in gospel initiatives. But if you buy this coffee, 100% of it will, go to local and global empowerment charities. Instantly got snatched up.
Right.
So I went to some people and like, hey, would you do 20, to double down on this, would you give $20? And so I had a few more people. So I think I bought like $100 coffee the next week. And that sold. And that kept on growing. And then other churches started hearing about what we were doing, and they started putting it. I had 2-3 guys living with me who came from California to do the church plant
Mm-hmm.
at that time. And one of them was just an amazing graphic artist. His name's Todd Chesham, and co-founder of the church. We had a local Methodist church did a big order, and they're like, what's the name of it? And I mean, you're probably saying you're a marketing guy. Of course, you're going to brand it. And I'm
Right,
like, it just wasn't like I called Red Eye my accidental company.
Right.
Like I just, I teach like business plans and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We didn't do any of that. It was just dumb luck.
Yeah.
It was like late at night, and we were trying to like, print labels on an inkjet and come up with a brand and everything. And at the time, I drank a drink called Red Eyes, which is a black coffee with a shot of espresso.
Okay.
Because in Tallahassee, I couldn't find any like rich, dark roast at the time. There was no Starbucks. There was nothing like that here. People are like, you came here without a Starbucks? I came here without a Costco or a Trader Joe's. So, and people would say I'm not dedicated to Tallahassee.
That's
Shame
right.
on you. I was here in the hard
Personal
days.
sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yes. Then my friend Todd's like, isn't a red eye like a tree frog in like Brazil or something? And I'm like, I don't know. Yeah. So he sketched up, this, red-eyed tree frog, and we wrote red eye on it, and then we changed the R-E, the D to a 3, so it was RE3
Right.
I, which most people never even saw on the brand. It started growing, and people and
So at that point, you're just buying coffee, repackaging, reselling.
yeah, that's
Okay.
exactly all we were doing was, and the roaster was extremely happy because we were buying tons of coffee.
I'm sure he was
from him,
happy.
and people were happy because they were getting premium roast coffee, which was limited in Tallahassee at the time. Now we're like a coffee mecca, but we were able to do like lots of really interesting, cool projects that people were excited about. Like we were able to invest in some FSU film students, and they did a documentary on child trafficking out of Benin. We were able to participate in helping build homes for single mothers in Guatemala. So all this really like cool stuff was
From
starting
the
to
profits of the coffee.
right. And 100% always just went to it. At that point, I stopped asking people for donations, and Red Eye was self-supporting. So out of the profits after expenses would go. We had to buy more coffee.
Right, sure. Yeah.
And in 2008, Ed Murray was making Midtown what we know as Midtown
Right.
now. Back in 2008, it was Whataburger. Brilliant man, had a brilliant vision for Midtown and achieved it. I don't think anybody could argue with that.
No.
So we went in there, and Ed's been just an amazing champion of Red Eye through the good times and the bad, and we've definitely had some bad times too. So we opened up a brick and mortar I had one elder say, if this doesn't work, I'll make sure that you're fired. So there was a lot of risk on it. I really believed in it. I never thought I was going to be in business again, but I felt this was right, and it was like what we were able to do through Red Eye was so much more than what we were able to do through the church globally and locally. We had grown to helping subsidize or bridge the gap of 76 families, nutritional gap for 76 families in Tallahassee every single week. We were able to help fund a nursing school in Haiti. So
You grew to multiple locations.
yeah, we grew to multiple locations. We had 6 at our height. There are 3 now.
Right.
I haven't been part of Red Eye in probably 4 years.
Right. You sold it, or the church sold it.
The church
Or how?
didn't want it, and they gifted it to me when I left the church.
Okay.
It was just too much for
Yeah.
them. And they're like, basically, this is our thank you present to you. We don't want it. It's basically been your thing anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So we scaled too quickly. We acquired another local coffee company that was a roaster and thought we had a really good business model, and we went into some new locations that didn't work out and was just a money draw, and took a while to right that ship and things. Now, the new CEO and owner, Barbie Morrow, is just doing a terrific job. She's absolutely fantastic. You should interview her. She probably will tell the story differently, but she really saved the company. Like, I don't know if it would have folded, but it definitely, with COVID and everything, it definitely had the blind staggers toward the end. Everything. She just reinvented it and is just doing like such an amazing job. And our partnership with, well, it's not Capital Regional anymore. It's HCA
Florida Capital Hospital.
Yes. So like our coffee shop in the hospital there has just been absolutely amazing. They've been incredibly generous, and we still have a location where the church is, Element 3, across from Tom Brown Park. Those 3 locations are doing really well.
Yeah.
And even with the incredible market pressure that has grown since we used to be almost the only show in town, and now everybody and their mother has a coffee shop.
Yeah. When I would say, I mean, for small business people in this community, the Midtown location of Red Eye has been, at least for me, my other place to meet. I mean, I'm not a coffee drinker, and I've been in that location.
I'll pray for you.
Thank you. Hundreds of times, because it's the place. I mean, it's centrally located. You cannot go in there without seeing somebody you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a significant location for a lot of people for a long time.
Absolutely. I think Jay Revel said it best, or I like the way he said it. He said more business deals are made at Red Eye before 9 a.m. than the rest of the day in Tallahassee. And, you walk in there and see people like Steve Evans and Ed Murray and, the mayor
elected
officials. And it was funny one day. Nobody knows who I am there. I was just like, I was walking in and somebody was walking in behind me, and I opened up the door and I'm like, hey, go ahead. Puts his head in, looks around, and then leaves. It was walking out. I said, you're not going to get coffee? Is there something wrong? And again, he didn't know who I was.
Right.
And he's like, oh, no. I stop here every single morning and put my head in to see if I could get a meeting that I couldn't get if I went through normal channels.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like, this is where, and it was not only commerce, right? I mean, you had, support groups, and it really was a centralized hub. And this is nothing I did. It just happened to be like, a lot of what Ed Murray did.
Right.
We just happened to be the right business in the right place at the right time. And it became something that, was important.
And in 2014, you joined the teaching faculty at the Jim Moran College of Entrepreneurship at Florida State University.
Small correction.
Oh, is that not right?
It's close. I was recruited by the College of Social Science in 2014 to create the social entrepreneurship ecosystem and start building the curriculum. 2015, FSU got a $100 million grant from the Jim Moran Foundation to start a college.
To start the college,
yeah,
right? Because we don't want to get confused with the Jim Moran Institute, which is an outreach program that helps entrepreneurs in town.
Right. The college teaches students the tools of entrepreneurship, and the Institute helps current entrepreneurs and small business owners.
Right.
Basically, they teach them the same thing, but they're practitioners, right? And they can put it to practice.
Yeah, I've been part of several programs that they do. It's awesome.
It's one of the best kept secrets probably in Florida.
Right.
Like what the Jim, and they do, I think, most of it for free.
Yeah, I mean, the Small Business Executive Program
is incredible.
Is
absolutely incredible. And not only the content, but the networking opportunities and everything, and that people don't know about it or don't take advantage of it. Know about it, it's just like crazy to me. It's just like great stuff. So yeah, we work with students, obviously, most of them, 20s.
Right.
And
so you're the social entrepreneur in residence, right? That's your title?
Yes, I am this. Yes, my business card's about 7 inches long. Yeah, so I do social entrepreneur, and most recently I'm teaching a lot more. Like we started a master's degree in social and sustainable enterprises, which is based in ESG, which is environmental social governances.
Okay.
So, and one thing that I try to teach and let the students know is this whole thing, failure is not an option. option. Failure is definitely an option. It's always, there. And all you can do, going back to, my mom, you do everything that you can, and there's going to be outside forces, and you got to, persevere. And at some point, you just have to be able to look at your family and look at yourself and say, I did everything I could.
All right, you've mentioned your wife a few times as we've talked. I imagine she's played a pretty big role in your story, lots of changes and adventures and risks. And tell me about her role in your life story to this point.
Yeah, and she's a very private person. She's probably I'm kind of like, this is my life, take it or leave it. This is who I am.
Right.
She's very private. She's ferociously loyal and supportive. She's always, supported everything that I wanted to do. That wasn't like too crazy. I remember going home asking her, this was in Redondo Beach, when I was going to leave the business and felt like I was meant to plant a church. And I said, hey, came home and I'm like, what do you think about being poor? And she was, she was always steadfast and 100%. There was a time in Red Eye that we thought we might lose everything. Everything was falling apart. It was, we had overextended and everything. She's just 100% supportive. She's just like, my dad's thing, there is a way, we'll figure it out. If we lose everything, we lose everything, and then we rebuild.
Two last questions, and one of them we've already talked about. You've actually used the exact word, so it's kind of weird, but two questions I always ask at the end is one, looking back on your life, what person or thing changed the trajectory of your life to this point?
No, Mrs. Bryson, 100%. There's so many people, Lee Bolin, there's been just so many people, and really people here in Tallahassee, Michael Joyce, who was the president of HCA in the Southern region, Steve Evans, Jay Revel. There's been just so many amazing people who Everett Drew, people who for some reason took an interest in my life and what I was doing and supported me. That's the biggest life lesson that I try to tell my students is trying to do it alone is you'll only be able to go so far.
All right, Mark, final question. This podcast is named How I Got Here. We've talked about how you got to this point in your life. Where do you think here might be for you in the next 3 to 5 years?
I have no idea. That's actually the big question for my life right now. I believe there's something coming. I don't know if it's the startup that I'm involved with, which I'm really excited about. I don't know if it's a different opportunity. I'm kind of free. I've been freed from I have to do this. I think there's lots of different things that are interesting. I love working with companies and trying to help them become more ethical and more sustainable and how to communicate that. I love working with the students. I like being active in the community. It could be a lot of different things. And I'm very open at this point to what's the next thing that, I feel like I have another at least 10 years, big, what's the big push in the next 10 years? I've done the church, I've done Red Eye, I've been able to make an impact at FSU. The consulting business is going really well. I don't think that's it. I think there's something else on the horizon. Maybe somebody listening to this podcast is going to shoot me an email and say, hey, what about this?
Yeah.
So I have an open door when it comes to opportunities. You can always say no, but if you don't hear it, you don't get to, see the possibilities. And I live in a world of possibilities.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can subscribe at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. It really does make a difference. Thanks to my amazing staff at Fiore Communications, who pick up the slack while I'm working on these podcasts, and to Troy Bloom for composing our theme music. You can hear more of Troy's creations on Facebook and Instagram at Troy Bloom Music. To connect with the podcast or suggest a future guest, follow us on social media or email us at podcast@fiorecommunications.com.